Good evening, everyone. Just turn off my own voice in my ear. It's always something I leave running before the stream to test audio and whatnot. I'd listen to the music. So, at the moment, I can't hear it. Although I did notice I could hear my typing. Probably fix that one day. Today is the shortest period of time after we finish work that we're streaming. So we've left, in this case, it was 1 hour. It's enough time to feed the kittens, get dinner, set things up, and go. But it doesn't leave a lot of time if troubleshooting is necessary. So Monday we started, it was like 7 p.m. and we went quite late, and that doesn't leave a lot of post-stream time to do things like I do very, very quick editing. I'm trying to get better at editing the videos. I watched a video last night, and I realized that, I'm technically doing it wrong. I try to cut off the first 10 minutes of my streams. If anyone is looking at the archive over on YouTube, you may notice the first few streams. They have a big, long chunk of wasted time. Phone to D&D? What does phone to D&D mean? Oh, do not disturb. I was like, you heard that right, like last time. Well, fortunately, this is just a test stream. So that kind of scuff is to be expected. Yes. Lifelong testing stream. Just like work, really. They say, like, in the IT industry, your production environment is your testing environment. It's very true. We can't afford. It's just testing environments are like a dream. It's really awesome to have one, but also its usefulness is debatable. And it comes with many caveats, right? There are some situations where it's like, oh yeah, cool, I am going to test this thing and it's going to confirm that it works in some fashion. But you always assume there's just no way that you can have all scenarios accounted for. And when you do go live with something in your production environment, you just assume something is going to break, and just make sure you have accounted for that. When you're releasing something, let people know it's going to happen. It doesn't matter how good your testing system is. Yeah, I forget many things. I have a quote command. And I put some funky, perhaps politically hot quotes in there. There's only like 5 or 6. It's not a big deal. Yeah, that exists. That exists. I wonder if it works, because we haven't tested it. So here we go. Yeah, it works. There you go. Quote number 5. Every stream is a test stream. It's proof. Wow, Valana, you're very sane tonight. That's probably, it's a percentage. So you're 1% off being perfectly sane, which is in itself a very abnormal state to be in. So is that really a good thing? You have to face every aspect of the world with a sane mind and attempt to deal with that. You have my sympathy. Yeah, that's not easy. Last time we finished part 1, chapters 6 to 8, and we also we had a little bit more time. And I'm trying to train up my voice. So we read the first chapter of part 2. That left me with, and I kind of also wanted to like have part 1 and part 2 be separate streams. So I stopped the stream, I restarted the stream just to make different recordings. So I have this odd 1 chapter recording over on YouTube. And I've been debating, like, this is why I started looking into like a beginner tutorial for DaVinci. I decided to use DaVinci Resolve because it seems very professional and it's free. Very strong argument having free things. I I think most people may agree, but also it is a very professional system, and it seems really good. And we have some friends who use it as well, so it comes recommended. I might try to stitch tonight's stream into the recording we have for part 2, chapter 1. We'll see how that goes. I might not. I might be lazy. It's a learning process. I don't expect the first whole bunch of streams I do to be polished by any means. I'm adding little bits and pieces. I've added stream markers and clip buttons and replay buttons into my stream deck here, and I'm just kind of having fun with that. I did fail big time last time, though. I forgot to switch to my reading stream, and that's a disappointment. So I'll have to remember to do that this time when I'm ready to go. As for the subject matter, last time we kind of moved on into yet another aspect of life, human life, which can be controlled by the authorities in an extremely fascist, extremely authoritarian dystopia. In this case, we talk about love, relationships, sexuality. Perhaps we get a bit more into that. There were some darker moments in the first couple of chapters regarding that, sort of a very base thoughts during the hate, the 2-minute hate. In this case, it was love and sort of the more positive aspects, and grappling with, well, kind of, you can imagine it's hard for individuals in this world to understand what love is, especially as the party is working so hard to stamp it out of existence. It wants to crush that part of the human spirit. Probably for very tropey reasons, very much reasons such as it gives people something to be inspired by. They lift one another up. They make each other strong. Instead, sex is reduced to, well, what did they say? A disgusting, just sort of necessary thing that you have to do to make more children for the party. But really, you just want to get it over, rush through it, get it over with, and sort of get on with your day. This horrible, nasty business. And this is what they've done. And we find out that our protagonist, they feel loyalties to someone other than Big Brother. That's right. And that's a problem for the party, obviously, because your loyalty needs to remain with Big Brother and nobody else. Otherwise, he can't fully control you. Winston is married. In fact, we learned this last time. He is married to a woman that he thought was incredibly dumb. Like, what did he call her? Something like a walking billboard or line repeaters. She would parrot all the party lines with full willingness and intellectual honesty / dishonesty. The whole fascinating concept of doublethink, and he had to experience, he had to tolerate, maybe suffer, you would say, her insistence that every night they attempt to make a baby. And it was very mechanical. It was for the sake of the party. It wasn't for them at all. She very much, it was obvious she didn't like it from her body language that was described to us. And the whole experience was very repulsive from his own perspective. Eventually, they decided that, they aren't going to have a baby. They weren't a compatible pair, or whatever the reason was. We weren't given the specifics, of course. This is not a medical journal. In the end, they were separated. The party does not allow divorce, but they do encourage separation. And marriage isn't even allowed between party members. So think of your favorite political party and think to yourself, in our world, two people in the same cabinet or or parliament or whatever you have, who in theory should be allowed to have a relationship with one another. Many workplaces frown on that, and there are some instances where it is inappropriate, but by and large, we're allowed to have relationships with our peers in the world around us, and that includes living your life together. But not so. Not so with the party. What was it? 2 members could apply to marry one another, but in almost all circumstances they were declined, especially if there was any sort of hint or idea that they were actually attracted to one another. If there was any kind of attracted. So I guess marriage between party members was a political affair, obviously not a personal one. If it became a personal issue, then the answer is automatic no. Absolutely not. Get the hell out of here. It was the proles, I guess, from whom the party expected more people to be birthed. The easily controlled proles who were kept ignorant of the bigger picture and kept squabbling amongst themselves over, like, what was the example they gave us? They gave us a bit of an arc where women were fighting over frying pans, cooking pots. And this was the greatest tragedy of the day. Never mind the rocket bomb that exploded over everyone's heads. No, we're just going to duck, and that's going to blow up some buildings and kill some people. Back to the frying pans. Got to get a frying pan. Those are rare. We're also told a little bit about how obscure the past is. There's very, very little evidence of what really happened in the past. The party has been very good at shutting down that information and obscuring it. Winston was wandering around the streets. Instead of obediently going to a community center to put in a face for the party, he encounters an old man. One who's old enough, despite the fact that the average age is apparently like 60. This old man was described as being, I believe, in his 80s, and means he came from well before the revolution, well before the party came to power, and he tried to get some idea of what life used to be like from before the revolution compared to today. He wanted, I think, a baseline for comparison. Many times throughout the book, we've been told that there is this core sort of nagging doubt about the messaging from the party. I mean, that's going to happen, especially if you're a part of the Ministry of Truth and you see the constant lies and rewrites that are done over history over and over again. And I guess the paper rubs thin. If you've ever used pencils and erasers in school and had to correct your mistakes multiple times on the same spot on the piece of paper, it gets thin. And so you have this evidence that things today, there's very little that can be trusted. What can you do with that? So you look for information that can't be erased. And okay, well, memories perhaps. Memories. Except this old man rambles a lot, I guess, as old men are wont to do. I'm starting to get that way. Look at the kind of streams I run. The old man was really hard to pin down any kind of information, events, or confirmations that today is better or worse. The closest he got was the old man saying everyone will opt for their younger days because they were healthier. Life didn't hurt every moment. And there's truth to that. We were told that those who had lived longer have been, I guess simply put, taught not to remember correctly, or at least encouraged and educated as to the appropriate responses to certain questions. You can imagine there's probably a lot of violence there. Why do we still have slow mode on? That's interesting. Let's turn that off. Oh, the broadcaster is not quite the same layout as the moderations. Looks oh, it says slow mode off. That's okay. Valana, did you do that? It still says slow mode. Maybe that interface is just wrong. That's okay too. No, it doesn't say it in the... Yeah, so maybe there's a bug with the broadcaster stream manager layout. This is fine. Towards the end, certainly into the first chapter of part 2, we sort of see, well, I guess it happened a little before, Winston and the dark-haired girl are starting a relationship. They started to communicate with one another, very subtle and covert fashion. And we learn just how far and just to what extremes a person has to go to avoid the party seeing them and suspecting them of quote-unquote foul play. Clandestine notes, meeting in crowded areas so they can barely whisper a few words to one another to arrange their next meeting. You do have to sort of ignore the fact that the girl randomly passes him a note saying "I love you" after seeing him, as far as we're aware, like two or four times throughout the entire novel, with not a word shared between them. Perhaps she just knew he had certain feelings in his heart. We can leave it at that. But they are learning to find ways to communicate and sneak around the world, constantly getting in their way. And I guess we will explore what happens to them next, today, as we continue chapter 2. Which I think I will get into. Now I'm going to hit, let's see, a Twitch marker. And hopefully that will let me easily see something in the video file when we switch over. I'm going to switch to my reading scene. So I have this awesome, cool book. It's big size. No, it's changed scene. Yeah, I did change scene. Yeah, I can see it. I have this big book. This is good for my eyes. I find it a little hard to read. I decorated the library, the reading room, a little bit. You can see over there at the top of the chimney is a new poster. It's the cover art for one of the earlier versions of the book. Hopefully it doesn't burn up in the fire. And yeah, here we are. Nice, big, chunky book. Move that over a bit. And that's fine. Okay. I'll take a little sip and we can begin. Part 2, Chapter 2. Winston picked his way up the lane through dappled light and shade, stepping out into pools of gold wherever the boughs parted. Under the trees to the left of him, the ground was misty with blue bells. The air seemed to kiss one's skin. It was the 2nd of May. From somewhere deep in the heart of the wood came the droning of ringdoves. It was a bit early. There had been no difficulties about the journey, and the girl was so evidently experienced that he was less frightened than he would normally have been. Presumably, she could be trusted to find a safe place. In general, you could not assume that you were much safer in the country than in London. Though there were no telescreens, of course, but there was always the danger of concealed microphones by which your voice might be picked up and recognized. Besides, it was not easy to make a journey by yourself without attracting attention. For distances of less than 100 kilometers, it was not necessary to get your passport endorsed, but sometimes there were patrols hanging around the railway stations who examined the papers of any party member they found there and asked awkward questions. However, no patrols had appeared, and on the walk from the station he had made sure by cautious backward glances that he was not being followed. The train was full of paroles. In holiday mood because of the summery weather, the wooden-seated carriage in which he traveled was filled to overflowing by a single enormous family ranging from the toothless great-grandmother to a month-old baby, going out to spend an afternoon with in-laws in the country, and, as they freely explained to Winston, to get hold of a little black market butter. The lane widened, and in a minute he came to the footpath she had told him of, a mere cattle track which plunged between the bushes. He had no watch, but it could not be 15 yet. The bluebells were so thick underfoot that it was impossible not to tread on them. He knelt down and began picking some, partly to pass the time away, but also from a vague idea that he would like to have a bunch of flowers to offer to the girl when they met. He had got together a big bunch and was smelling their faint, sickly scent when the sound at his back froze him. The unmistakable crackle of foot on twigs. He went on picking bluebells. It was the best thing to do. It might be the girl, or he might have been followed after all. To look around was to show guilt. He picked another and another. A hand fell lightly on his shoulder. He looked up. It was the girl. She shook her head, evidently as a warning that he must keep silent, then parted the bushes and quickly led the way along the narrow track into the wood. Obviously, she had been that way before, for she dodged the boggy bits, as though by habit. Winston followed, still clasping his bunch of flowers. His first feeling was relief, but as he watched the strong, slender body moving in front of him, with the scarlet sash that was just tight enough to bring out the curve of her hips, the sense of his own inferiority was heavy upon him. Even now it seemed quite likely that when she turned around and looked at him, she would draw back after all. The sweetness of the air and the greenness of the leaves daunted him. Already on the walk from the station, the May sunshine had made him feel dirty and etiolated. I swear to God, this author loves his thesaurus. A creature of indoors, with the sooty dust of London in the pores of his skin. It occurred to him that till now she had probably never seen him in broad daylight in the open. They came to the fallen tree that she had spoken of. The girl hopped over and forced apart the bushes in which there did not seem to be an opening. When Winston followed her, he found that they were in a natural clearing, a tiny grassy knoll surrounded by tall saplings that shut it in completely. The girl stopped and turned. "Here we are," she said. He was facing her at several paces' distance, and yet he did not dare move nearer her. "I didn't want to say anything in the lane," she went on, in the case there's a mic hidden there. I don't suppose there is, but there could be. There's always the chance of one of those swine recognizing her voice. We're all right here." He still had not the courage to approach her. "We're all right here," he repeated stupidly. "Yes, look at the trees." They were small ashes, which at some time had been cut down and had sprouted up again into a forest of poles, none of them thinner than one's wrists. "There's nothing big enough to hide a mic in. Besides, I've been here before." They were only making conversation. He had managed to move closer to her now. She stood before him very upright, with a smile on her face that looked faintly ironical, as though she were wondering why he was so slow to act. The bluebells had cascaded onto the ground. They seemed to have fallen of their own accord. He took her hand. Would you believe, he said, that until this moment I didn't know what color your eyes were? They were brown, he noted, a rather light shade of brown with dark lashes. Now that you've seen what I'm really like, can you still bear to look at me? Yes, easily. I'm 39 years old. I've got a wife that I can't get rid of. I've got varicose veins. I've got 5 false teeth. I couldn't care less, said the girl. The next moment, it was hard to say by whose act she was in his arms. At the beginning, he had no feeling except sheer incredulity. The youthful body was strained against his own. The mass of dark hair was against his face, and yes, she actually had turned her face up, and he was kissing the wide red mouth. She had clasped her arms about his neck. She was calling him darling, precious one, loved one. He had pulled her down onto the ground. She was utterly unresisting. He could do what he liked with her, but the truth was that he had no physical sensation except that of mere contact. All he felt was incredulity and pride. He was glad that this was happening, but he had no physical desire. It was too soon. Her youth and prettiness had frightened him. He was too much used to living without women. He did not know the reason. The girl picked herself up and pulled a bluebell out of her hair. She sat against him, putting her arm around his waist. Never mind, dear. There's no hurry. We've got the whole afternoon. Isn't this a splendid hideout? I found it when I got lost once on a community hike. If anyone was coming, you'd hear them 100 meters away. What is your name? Said Winston. Julia. I know yours is Winston. Winston Smith. How did you find out? I expect I'm better at finding things out than you are, dear. Tell me, what did you think of me before that day I gave you the note? He did not feel any temptation to tell lies. It was even a sort of love offering to start off by telling the worst. I hated the sight of you, he said. I wanted to rape you and then murder you afterwards. 2 weeks ago, I thought seriously of smashing your head in with a cobblestone. If you really want to know, I imagine that you had something to do with the thought police. The girl laughed delightedly, evidently taking this as a tribute to the excellence of her disguise. Not the thought police. You didn't honestly think that. Well, perhaps not that exactly. But from your general appearance, merely because you're young and fresh and healthy, you understand. I thought that probably you thought I was a good party member. Pure in word and deed, banners, processions, slogans, games, community hikes, all that stuff. And you thought that if I had a quarter of a chance, I'd denounce you as a thought criminal and get you killed off? Yes, something of that kind. A great many young girls are like that, you know. It's this bloody thing that does it, she said, ripping off the scarlet sash of the Junior Anti-Sex League and flinging it onto a bough. Then, as though touching her waist had reminded her of something, she felt in the pocket of her overalls and produced a small slab of chocolate. She broke it in half and gave one of the pieces to Winston. Even before he had taken it, he knew by the smell that it was very unusual chocolate. It was dark and shiny, and was wrapped in silver paper. Chocolate normally was dull brown, crumbly stuff that tasted, as nearly as one could describe it, like the smoke of a rubbish fire. But at some time or another, he had tasted chocolate like the piece she had given him. The first whiff of its scent had stirred up some memory which he could not pin down, but which was powerful and troubling. Where did you get this stuff? He said. Black market, she said indifferently. Actually, I am that sort of girl. To look at, I'm good at games. I was a troop leader in the Spies. I do voluntary work 3 evenings a week for the Junior Anti-Sex League. Hours and hours I spent pasting their bloody rot all over London. I always carry one end of a banner in the processions. I always look cheerful and I never shirk anything. Always yell with the crowds, that's what I say. It's the only way to be safe. The first fragment of chocolate had melted on Winston's tongue. The taste was delightful. But there was still that memory moving around the edges of his consciousness. Something strongly felt, but not reducible to definite shape. Like an object seen out of the corner of one's eye, he pushed it away from him, aware only that it was the memory of some action which he would have liked to undo, but could not. "You're very young," he said. "You are 10 or 15 years younger than I am. What could you see to attract you in a man like me?" "It was something in your face. I thought I'd take a chance. I'm good at spotting people who don't belong. As soon as I saw you, I knew you were against them." Them, it appeared, meant the party, and above all the inner party, about whom she talked with an open, jeering hatred which made Winston feel uneasy, although he knew that they were safe here if they could be safe anywhere. A thing that astonished him about her was the coarseness of her language. Party members were supposed not to swear, and Winston himself very seldom did swear, aloud at any rate. Julia, however, seemed unable to mention the party, and especially the inner party, without using the kind of words that you saw chalked up in dripping alleyways. He did not dislike it. It was merely one symptom of her revolt against the party and all its ways, and somehow it seemed natural and healthy, like the sneeze of a horse that smells bad hay. They had left the clearing and were wandering again through the checkered shade, with their arms round each other's waists whenever it was wide enough to walk two abreast. He noticed how much softer her waist seemed to feel now that the sash was gone. They did not speak above a whisper. Outside the clearing, Julia said it was better to go quietly. Presently, they had reached the edge of the little wood. She stopped him. "Don't go out into the open. There might be someone watching. We're all right if we keep behind the boughs." They were standing in the shade of hazel bushes. The sunlight filtering through innumerable leaves was still hot on their faces. Winston looked out into the field beyond and underwent a curious, slow shock of recognition. He knew it by sight. An old, close-bitten pasture with a footpath wandering across it and a molehill here and there. In the ragged hedge on the opposite side of the boughs of the elm trees In the ragged hedge on the opposite side of the boughs of the elm trees swayed just perceptibly in the breeze, and their leaves stirred faintly in the dense mass like a woman's hair. Surely, somewhere nearby, but out of sight, there must be a stream with green pools where dace were swimming. "That's right, Thor. Isn't there a stream somewhere near here?" he whispered. "That's right. There is a stream. It's at the edge of the next field, actually. There are fish in it, great big ones. You can watch them laying in the pools under the willow trees, waving their tails." "It's the Golden Country, almost," he murmured. "The Golden Country?" "It's nothing, really. A landscape I've seen sometimes in a dream." "Look," whispered Julia. A thrush had alighted on a bough not 5 meters away, almost at the level of their faces. Perhaps it had not seen them. It was in the sun, they in the shade. It spread out its wings, fitted them carefully into place again, ducked its head for a moment, as though making a sort of obeisance to the sun, and then began to pour forth a torrent of song. In the afternoon hush, the volume of sound was startling. Winston and Julia clung together, fascinated. The music went on and on, minute after minute, with astonishing variations, never once repeating itself, almost as though the bird were deliberately showing off its virtuosity. Sometimes it stopped for a few seconds. spread out and resettled its wings, then swelled its speckled breast and again burst into song. Winston watched it with a sort of vague reverence. For whom, for what, was the bird singing? No mate, no rival was watching it. What made it sit at the edge of the lonely wood and pour its music into nothingness? He wondered whether, after all, there was a microphone hidden somewhere near. He and Julia had spoken only in low whispers, and it would not pick up what they had said, but it would pick up the thrush. Perhaps, at the other end of the instrument, some small, beetle-like man was listening intently, listening to that. But by degrees, the flood of music drove all speculations out of his mind. It was as though it were a kind of liquid stuff that poured all over him and got mixed up with the sunlight that filtered through the leaves. He stopped thinking and merely felt. The girl's waist in the bend of his arm was soft and warm. He pulled her round so that they were breast to breast. Her body seemed to melt into his. Wherever his hands moved, it was all as yielding as water. Their mouths clung together. It was quite different from the hard kisses they had exchanged earlier. When they moved their faces apart again, both of them sighed deeply. The bird took fright and fled with a clatter of wings. Winston put his lips against her ear. "Now," he whispered. "Not here," she whispered back. "Come back to the hideout. It's safer." Quickly, and with an occasional crackle of twigs, they threaded their way back to the clearing. When they were once inside the ring of saplings, she turned and faced him. They were both breathing fast, but the smile had reappeared around the corners of her mouth. She stood looking at him for an instant, then felt at the zipper of her overalls, and yes, it was almost as in his dream, almost as swiftly as he had imagined it. She had torn her clothes off, and when she flung them aside, it was with that same magnificent gesture by which a whole civilization seemed to be annihilated. Her body gleamed white in the sun, but for a moment he did not look at her body. His eyes were anchored by the freckled face with its faint, bold smile. He knelt down before her and took her hands in his. "Have you done this before?" "Of course. Hundreds of times. Well, scores of times anyway. With party members." "Yes, always with party members." "With members of the inner party?" "Not with those swine, no. But there's plenty that would if they got half a chance. They're not so holy as they make out." His heart leapt. Scores of times she had done it. He wished it had been hundreds, thousands. Anything that hinted at corruption always filled him with a wild hope. Who knew? Perhaps the party was rotten under the surface, its cult of strenuousness and self-denial simply a sham concealing inequity. If he could have infected the whole lot of them with leprosy or syphilis, how gladly he would have done so. Anything to rot, to weaken, to undermine. He pulled her down so that they were kneeling face to face. "Listen. The more men you had, the more I love you. Do you understand that?" "Yes. Perfectly. I hate purity. I hate goodness. I don't want any virtue to exist anywhere. I want everyone to be corrupt to the bones." "Well then, I ought to suit you, dear. I am corrupt to the bones." "You like doing this? I don't mean simply me. I mean the thing in itself. I adore it." That was above all what he wanted to hear. Not merely the love of one person, but the animal instinct, the simple, undifferentiated desire. That was the force that would tear the party to pieces. He pressed her down upon the grass among the fallen bluebells. This time there was no difficulty. Presently, the rising and falling of their breasts slowed to normal speed, and in a sort of pleasant helplessness they fell apart. The sun seemed to have grown hotter. They were both sleepy. He reached out for the discarded overalls and pulled them partly over her. Almost immediately they fell asleep and slept for about half an hour. Winston woke first. He sat up and watched the freckled face, still peacefully asleep, pillowed on the palm of her hand, except for her mouth. You could not call her beautiful. Except for her mouth, you could not call her beautiful. There was a line or two around the eyes, if you looked closely. The short, dark hair was extraordinarily thick and soft. It occurred to him that he still did not know her surname or where she lived. The young, strong body, now helpless in sleep, awoke in him a pitying, protecting feeling. But the mindless tenderness that he had felt under the hazel tree while the thrush was singing had not quite come back. He pulled the overalls aside and studied her smooth, white flank. In the old days, he thought, a man looked at a girl's body and saw that it was desirable, and that was the end of the story. But you could not have pure love or pure lust nowadays. No emotion was pure, because everything was mixed up with fear and hatred. Their embrace had been a battle, the climax of victory. It was a blow struck against the party. It was a political act. No slut-shaming here, nope. Nope. Especially if it's a political act, like, is it political shaming then? Alright. Chapter 3. We can come here once again, said Julia. It's generally safe to use any hideout twice, but not for another month or two, of course. As soon as she woke up, her demeanor had changed. She became alert and businesslike, put her clothes on, knotted the scarlet sash about her waist, and began arranging the details of their journey home. It seemed natural to leave this to her. She obviously had a practical cunning which Winston lacked, and she seemed also to have an exhaustive knowledge of the countryside around London, stored away from innumerable community hikes. The route she gave him was quite different from the one by which she had come, and brought him out at a different railway station. Never go home the same way as you went out, she said, as though enunciating an important general principle. She would leave first, and Winston was to wait half an hour before following her. She had named a place where they could meet after work, 4 evenings hence. It was a street in one of the poorer quarters, where there was an open market which was generally crowded and noisy. She would be hanging about among the stalls, pretending to be in search of shoelaces or sewing thread. If she judged that the coast was clear, she would blow her nose when he approached. Otherwise, he was to walk past her without recognition. But with luck, in the middle of the crowd, it would be safe to talk for a quarter of an hour and arrange another meeting. And now I must go, she said, as soon as she had mastered his instructions. As soon as he had mastered his instructions. I'm due back at 19:30. I've got to put in 2 hours for the Junior Anti-Sex League, handing out leaflets or something. Isn't it bloody? Give me a brush down, would you? I haven't got any twigs in my hair, are you sure? Then goodbye, my love. Goodbye. She flung herself into his arms, kissed him almost violently, and a moment later pushed her way through the saplings and disappeared into the wood with very little noise. Even now he had not found out her surname or her address. However, it made no difference, for it was inconceivable that they could ever meet indoors or exchange any kind of written communication. and it unfortunate that she had the brush down and then went through the bushes. Seems counterproductive. As it happened, they never went back to the clearing in the wood. During the month of May, there was only one further occasion on which they actually succeeded in making love. That was in another hiding place known to Julia, a belfry of a ruinous church in an almost deserted stretch of country where an atomic bomb had fallen 30 years earlier. It was a good hiding place once you got there, but the getting there was very dangerous. For the rest, they could meet only in the streets, in a different place every evening, and never for more than half an hour at a time. In the street, it was usually possible to talk after a fashion. As they drifted down the crowded pavements, not quite abreast and never looking at one another, they carried on a curious, intermittent conversation which flicked on and off like the beams of a lighthouse. Suddenly nipped into silence by the approach of a party uniform or the proximity of a telescreen, then taken up again minutes later in the middle of a sentence. Then abruptly cut short as they parted at the agreed spot, then continued almost without introduction on the following day. Julia appeared to be quite used to this kind of conversation, which she called talking by installments. She was also surprisingly adept at speaking without moving her lips. Just once in almost a month of nightly meetings, they managed to exchange a kiss. They were passing in silence down a side street. Julia would never speak when they were away from the main streets. When there was a deafening roar, the earth heaved and the air darkened, and Winston found himself lying on his side, bruised and terrified. A rocket bomb must have dropped quite near at hand. Suddenly he became aware of Julia's face a few centimeters from his own. Deathly white as chalk. Even her lips were white. She was dead. He clasped her against him and found that he was kissing a live, warm face, but there was some powdery stuff that got in the way of his lips. Both of their faces were thickly coated with plaster. There were evenings when they reached their rendezvous and then had to walk past one another without a sign, because a patrol had just come round the corner or a helicopter was hovering overhead. Even if it had been less dangerous, it would still have been difficult to find time to meet. Winston's working week was 60 hours, Julia's was even longer, and their free days varied according to the pressure of work and did not often coincide. Julia, in any case, seldom had an evening completely free. She spent an astonishing amount of time in attending lectures and demonstrations, distributing literature for the Junior Anti-Sex League, preparing banners for Hate Week, making collections for the Savings Campaign, and such like activities. It paid, she said. It was camouflage. If you kept the small rules, you could break the big ones. She even introduced Winston to mortgage yet another of his evenings by enrolling himself for the part-time munition work, which was done voluntarily by zealous party members. So, one evening every week, Winston spent 4 hours of paralyzing boredom screwing together small bits of metal which were probably parts of bomb fuses in a draughty, ill-lit workshop where the knocking of hammers mingled drearily with the music of the telescreens. When they met in the church tower, the gaps in their fragmentary conversation were filled up. It was a blazing afternoon. The air in the little square chamber above the bells was hot and stagnant, and smelt overpoweringly of pigeon dung. They sat talking for hours on the dusty, twig-littered floor, one or other of them getting up from time to time to cast a glance through the arrow slits and make sure that no one was coming. Julia was 26 years old. She lived in a hostel with 30 other girls, always in the stink of women. How I hate women, she said, parenthetically. Valana, I'm going to look that word up when I'm done. I think I've never heard that. And she worked, as he had guessed, on the novel writing machines in the fiction department. She enjoyed her work, which consisted chiefly in running and servicing a powerful but tricky electric motor. She was not clever, but she was fond of using her hands and felt at home with machinery. She could describe the whole process of composing a novel, from the general directive issued by the planning committee down to the final touching up by the rewrite squad. But she was not interested in the finished product. She didn't much care for reading. She said books were just a commodity that had to be produced, like jam or bootlaces. She had no memories of anything before the early 60s, and the only person she had ever known who talked frequently of the days before the revolution was a grandfather who had disappeared when she was 8. Parenthetically, a side comment not really related to what you're talking about. I can't even... How I hate women, she said. Oh, okay. That, like, holy cow. Sure. I hate women is her side comment, and we had to do a 45-syllable word to figure that one out. Awesome. Thank you, George. Okay, now where the hell was I? She had no... grandfather who had disappeared when she was 8. At school, she had been captain of the hockey team and had won the gymnastics trophy 2 years running. She had been a troop leader in the Spies and a branch secretary in the Youth League before joining the Junior Anti-Sex League. She had always borne an excellent character. She had even, an infallible mark of good reputation, been picked out to work in pornosec, the subsection of the fiction department which turned out cheap pornography for distribution among the proles. It was nicknamed Muckhouse by the people who worked in it. She remarked, there she had remained for a year, helping to produce booklets and sealed packets with titles like Spanking Stories or One Night in a Girls' School, to be brought furtively by proletarian youths who were under the impression that they were buying something illegal. What are these books like? Asked Winston curiously. Oh, ghastly rubbish. They're boring, really. They only have 6 plots, but they swap them round a bit. Of course, I was only on the kaleidoscopes. I was never in the rewrite squad. I'm not literary, dear. Not even enough for that. He learned with astonishment that all the workers in pornosec, except the heads of the departments, were girls. The theory was that men, whose sex instincts were less controllable than those of women, lucky you women, were in greater danger of being corrupted by the filth they handled. They don't even like having married women there, she added. Girls are always supposed to be so pure. Here's one who isn't, anyway. She had had her first love affair when she was 16, with a party member of 60 who later committed suicide to avoid arrest. And a good job too, said Julia. Otherwise they'd have had my name out of him when he confessed. Since then there had been various others. Life, as she saw it, was quite simple. You wanted a good time? They, meaning the party, wanted to stop you having it. You broke the rules as best you could. She seemed to think it's just as natural that they should want to rob you of your pleasures as that you should want to avoid being caught. She hated the party, and said so in the crudest words, but she made no general criticism of it. Except where it touched upon her own life, she had no interest in party doctrine. He noticed that she never used newspeak words, except the ones that passed into everyday use. She had never heard of the Brotherhood and refused to believe in its existence. Any kind of organized revolt against the party, which was bound to be a failure, struck her as stupid. The clever thing was to break the rules and stay alive all the same. He wondered vaguely how many others like her there might be in the younger generation people who had grown up in the world of the revolution, knowing nothing else, accepting the party as something unalterable, like the sky, not rebelling against its authority, but simply evading it, as a rabbit dodges a dog. They did not discuss the possibility of getting married. It was too remote to be worth thinking about. No imaginable committee would ever sanction such a marriage, even if Catherine, Winston's wife, could somehow have been got rid of. It was hopeless, even as a daydream. "What was she like, your wife?" said Julia. "She was... Do you know the newspeak word, good thinkful? Meaning naturally orthodox, incapable of thinking a bad thought." "No, I didn't know the word, but I know the kind of person right enough." He began telling her the story of his married life, but curiously enough, she appeared to know the essential parts of it already. She described to him, almost as though she had seen or felt it, the stiffening of Catherine's body as soon as he touched her, the way in which she still seemed to be pushing him from her with all her strength, even when her arms were clasped tightly around him. With Julia, he felt no difficulty in talking about such things. Catherine, in any case, had long ceased to be a painful memory and became merely a distasteful one. "I could have stood it if it hadn't been for one thing," he said. He told her about the frigid little ceremony that Catherine had forced him to go through on the same night every week. She hated it, but nothing would make her stop doing it. She used to call it, but you'll never guess. "Our duty to the party," said Julia promptly. "How did you know that?" "I've been at school too, dear. Sex talks once a month for the over 16s, and in the youth movement, they rub it into you for years. I dare say it works in a lot of cases, but of course you can never tell. People are such hypocrites." She began to enlarge upon the subject. With Julia, everything came back to her own sexuality. As soon as this was touched upon in any way, she was capable of great acuteness. Unlike Winston, she had grasped the inner meaning of the party's sexual puritanism. Good Lord. It was not merely the sex instinct created a world of its own which was outside the party's control, and which therefore had to be destroyed if possible. What was more important was that sexual privation induced hysteria, which was desirable because it could be transformed into war fever and leader worship. The way she put it was, "When you make love, you're using up energy, and afterwards you feel happy and don't give a damn for anything. They can't bear you to feel like that. They want you to be bursting with energy all the time. All this marching up and down and cheering and waving flags is simply sex gone sour. If you're happy inside yourself, why should you get excited about Big Brother and the 3-year plans and the 2 minutes hate and all the rest of their bloody rot?" Yeah, that's incel culture these days, isn't it? Yeah. It's really causing a problem. That was very true, he thought. There was a direct, intimate connection between chastity and political orthodoxy. For how could the fear, the hatred, the lunatic credulity which the party needed in its members to be kept at the right pitch, except by bottling down some powerful instinct and using it as a driving force? The sex impulse was dangerous to the party, and the party had turned it to account. They had played a similar trick with the instinct of parenthood. A family could not actually be abolished, and indeed, people were encouraged to be fond of their children in almost the old-fashioned way. The children, on the other hand, were systematically turned against their parents and taught to spy on them and report their deviations. The family had become, in effect, an extension of the thought police. It was a device by means of which everyone could be surrounded night and day by informers who knew them intimately. Terrifying. Abruptly, his mind went back to Catherine. Catherine would unquestionably have denounced him to the thought police if she had not happened to be too stupid to detect the unorthodoxy of his opinions. But what really recalled her to him at this moment was the stifling heat of the afternoon, which had brought the sweat out on his forehead. He began telling Julia of something that had happened, or rather had failed to happen, on another sweltering summer afternoon 11 years ago. It was 3 or 4 months after they were married. They had lost their way on a community hike somewhere in Kent. They had only lagged behind the others for a couple of minutes, but they took a wrong turning and presently found themselves pulled up short by the edge of an old chalk quarry. It was a sheer drop of 10 or 20 meters with boulders at the bottom. There was nobody of whom they could ask the way. As soon as she realized that they were lost, Catherine became very uneasy. To be away from the noisy mob of hikers, even for a moment, gave her a feeling of wrongdoing. She wanted to hurry back by the way they had come and start searching in the other direction, but at this moment Winston noticed some tufts of the loosestrife growing in the cracks of the cliff beneath them. One tuft was of 2 colors, magenta and brick red, apparently growing on the same root. He had never seen anything of the kind before, and he called to Catherine to come and look at it. "Look, Catherine, look at those flowers. That clump down near the bottom. Do you see they're 2 different colors?" She had already turned to go, but she did rather fretfully come back for a moment. She even leaned out over the cliff face to see where he was pointing. He was standing a little behind her, and he put his hand on her waist to steady her. At this moment it suddenly occurred to him how completely alone they were. There was not a human creature anywhere, not a leaf stirring, not even a bird awake. In a place like this, the danger that there would be a hidden microphone was very small, and even if there was a microphone, it would only pick up sounds. It was the hottest, sleepiest hour of the afternoon. The sun blazed down upon them. The sweat tickled his face, and the thought struck him. "Why didn't you give her a good shove?" said Julia. "I would have." "Yes, dear, you would have. I would, if I'd been the same person then as I am now. Or perhaps I would. I'm not certain." "Are you sorry you didn't?" "Yes. On the whole, I'm sorry I didn't." They were sitting side by side on the dusty floor. He pulled her close against him. Her head rested on his shoulder, the pleasant smell of her hair conquering the pigeon dung. She was very young, he thought. She still expected something from life. She did not understand that to push an inconvenient person over a cliff solves nothing. "Actually, it would have made no difference," he said. "Then why are you sorry you didn't do it?" "Only because I prefer a positive to a negative. In this game that we're playing, we can't win. Some kinds of failure are better than other kinds, that's all." He felt her shoulders give a wriggle of dissent. She always contradicted him when he said anything of this kind. She would not accept it as a law of nature that the individual is always defeated. In a way, she realized that she herself was doomed, that sooner or later the thought police would catch her and kill her. But with another part of her mind, she believed that it was somehow possible to construct a secret world. Sorry, hiccuping. A secret world in which you could live as you chose. All you needed was luck and cunning and boldness. She did not understand that there was no such thing as happiness, that the only victory lay in the far future, long after you were dead. That from the moment of declaring war on the party, it was better to think of yourself as a corpse. "We are the dead," he said. "We're not dead yet," said Julie prosaically. "Not physically. 6 months, a year, 5 years conceivably. I'm afraid of death. You're young, so presumably you're more afraid of it than I am. Obviously, we shall put it off for as long as we can, but it makes very little difference. So long as human beings stay human, death and life are the same thing." "Oh, rubbish. Which would you sooner sleep with, me or a skeleton? Don't you enjoy being alive? Don't you like feeling? This is me. This is my hand. This is my leg. I'm real. I'm solid. I'm alive. Don't you like this?" She twisted herself round and pressed her bosom against him. He could feel her breasts, ripe yet firm, through her overalls. Her body seemed to be pouring some of its youth and vigor into his. "Yes, I like that," he said. "Then stop talking about dying, and now listen, dear. We've got to fix up about the next time we meet. We may as well go back to the place in the wood. We've given it a good long rest, but you must get there by a different way this time. I've got it all planned out. You take the train, but look, I'll draw it out for you." And in her practical way, she scraped together a small square of dust, and with a twig from a pigeon's nest, began drawing a map on the floor. Sippy sippy time. Okay, Chapter 4. Winston looked round the shabby little room above Mr. Charrington's shop. Beside the window, the enormous bed was made up, with ragged blankets and a coverless bolster. The old-fashioned clock with the 12-hour face was ticking away on the mantelpiece. In the corner, on the gate-leg table, the glass paperweight which he had bought on his last visit gleamed softly out of the half-darkness. I guess he left it there. In the fender was a battered tin oil stove, a saucepan, 2 cups, provided by Mr. Charrington. Winston lit the burner and set a pan of water to boil. He had brought an envelope full of Victory coffee and some saturine tablets. The clock's hands said 17:20. It was 19:20, really. She was coming at 19:30. Folly, folly, his heart kept saying. Conscious, gratuitous, suicidal folly. Of all the crimes that a party member could commit, this one was the least possible to conceal. Actually, the idea had first floated into his head in the form of a vision of the glass paperweight mirrored by the surface of the gate-leg table. As he had foreseen, Mr. Charrington had made no difficulty about letting the room. He was obviously glad of the few dollars it would bring him. Nor did he seem shocked or become offensively knowing when it was made clear that Winston wanted the room for the purpose of a love affair. Instead, he looked into the middle distance and spoke in generalities, with so delicate an air as to give the impression that he had become partly invisible. Privacy, he said, was a very valuable thing. Everyone wanted a place where they could be alone occasionally. And when they had such a place, it was only common courtesy in anyone else who drew of it to keep his knowledge to himself, or who knew of it. He even seemed almost to fade out of existence as he did so. Added that there were 2 entries to the house, one of them through the backyard, which gave on an alley. Under the windows, somebody was singing. Winston peeped out, secure in the protection of the muslin curtain. The June sun was still high in the sky, and the sun-filled court below. And in the sun-filled court below, a monstrous woman, solid as a Norman pillar, with brawny red forearms and a sacking apron strapped about her middle, was stumping to and fro between a washtub and a clothesline, pegging out a series of square white things which Winston recognized as babies' diapers. Whenever her mouth was not corked with closed pegs, she was singing in a powerful contralto. It was only an oh dear, I have to sing. Now, I'm not singing. No singing aloud. It was only an opless fancy. It passed like an April dye. But a look and a word and the dreams they stirred, they have stolen my art awry. Why? The tune had been haunting London for weeks past. It was one of countless similar songs published for the benefit of the proles by a subsection of the music department. The words of these songs were composed without any human intervention whatever on an instrument known as a versificator. A versificator, oh dear. But the woman sang so tunefully as to tune the dreadful rubbish into an almost pleasant sound. Jenny high music. Only with no nuclear power stations, I suppose. He could hear the woman singing and the scrape of her shoes on the flagstones and the cries of the children in the street. And somewhere in the far distance a faint roar of traffic. And yet the room seemed curiously silent, thanks to the absence of a telescreen. Folly, 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 he thought again. It was inconceivable that they could frequent this place for more than a few weeks without being caught. But the temptation of having a hiding place that was truly their own, indoors and near at hand, had been too much for both of them. For some time after their visit to the church belfry, it had been impossible to arrange meetings. Working hours had been drastically increased in anticipation of Hate Week. It was more than a month distant, but the enormous complex preparations that it entailed were throwing extra work onto everybody. Finally, both of them managed to secure a free afternoon on the same day. They had agreed to go back to the clearing in the wood. On the evening beforehand, they met briefly in secret. As usual, Winston hardly looked at Julia as they drifted towards one another in the crowd, but from the short glance he gave her, it seemed to him that she was paler than usual. "It's all off," she murmured as soon as she judged it safe to speak. "Tomorrow, I mean." "What?" Tomorrow afternoon, I can't come." "Why not?" "Oh, the usual reason. It started early this time." For a moment, he was violently angry. During the month that he had known her, the nature of his desire for her had changed. At the beginning, there had been little true sensuality in it. Their first lovemaking had been simply an act of the will. But after the second time, it was different. The smell of her hair, the taste of her mouth, the feeling of her skin seemed to have got inside him, or into the air all around him. She had become a physical necessity, something that he not only wanted but felt that he had a right to. When she said she could not come, he had the feeling that she was cheating him. But just at this moment, the crowd pressed them together, and their hands accidentally met. She gave the tips of his fingers a quick squeeze that seemed to invite not desire, but affection. It struck him that when one lived with a woman, this particular disappointment must be a normal, recurring event, and a deep tenderness, such as he had not felt for her before, suddenly took a hold of him. He wished that they were a married couple of 10 years standing. He wished that he were walking through the streets with her just as they were doing now, but openly and without fear, talking of trivialities and buying odds and ends for the household. He wished, above all, that they had some place where they could be alone together without feeling the obligation to make love every time they met. It was not actually at that moment, but at some time on the following day, that the idea of renting Mr. Charrington's room had occurred to him. When he suggested it to Julia, she had agreed with unexpected readiness. Both of them knew that it was lunacy. It was as though they were intentionally stepping nearer to their graves. As he sat waiting on the edge of the bed, he thought again of the cellars of the Ministry of Love. It was curious how that predestined horror movie in and out of one's consciousness. Or moved, in and out of one's consciousness. There it lay, fixed in future times, preceding death as surely as 99 precedes 100. One could not avoid it, but one could perhaps postpone it, and yet, instead, every now and then, by a conscious, willful act, one chose to shorten the interval before it happened. At this moment, there was a quick step on the stairs. Julia burst into the room. She was carrying a tool bag of coarse brown canvas, such as he had sometimes seen her carry to and fro at the ministry. He started forward to take her in his arms, but she disengaged herself rather hurriedly, partly because she was still holding the tool bag. "Half a second," she said. "Just let me show you what I brought. Did you bring some of that filthy victory coffee? I thought you would. You can chuck it away again, because we shan't be needing it. Look here." She fell on her knees, threw open the bag, and tumbled out some spanners and a screwdriver that filled the top part of it. Underneath were a number of neat paper packets. The first packet that she passed to Winston had a strange yet vaguely familiar feeling. It was filled with some kind of heavy, sand-like stuff which yielded wherever you touched it. "It isn't sugar," he said. "Real sugar, not saccharine sugar, and here's a loaf of bread, proper white bread, not our bloody stuff, and a little pot of jam, and here's a tin of milk. But look, this one I'm really proud of. I had to wrap a bit of sacking around it because..." But she did not need to tell him why she had wrapped it up. The smell was already filling the room, a hot, rich smell which seemed like an emanation from his early childhood, but which one did occasionally mate with even now, blowing down a passageway before a door slammed, or diffusing itself mysteriously in a crowded street, sniffed for an instant, and then lost again. "It's coffee," he murmured. "Real coffee. It's inner party coffee. There's a whole kilo in here," she said. "How did you manage to get hold of all these things?" "It's all inner party stuff. There's nothing those swine don't have. Nothing. But of course, waiters and servants and people pinching things. And look, I got a little packet of tea as well." Winston had squatted down beside her. He tore open a corner of the packet. "It's real tea, not blackberry leaves." Excuse me. "There's been a lot of tea about lately. They've captured India or something," she said vaguely. "But listen, dear, I want you to turn your back on me for 3 minutes. Go sit on the other side of the bed, don't go too near the window, and don't turn round till I tell you." Winston gazed abstractedly through the muslin curtain. Down in the yard, the red-armed woman was still marching to and fro between the washtub and the line. She took 2 more pegs out of her mouth and sang with deep feeling. They see that time heals all things. They say you can't always forget. But the smiles and the tears across the years, they twist my ear strings yet." She knew the whole drivelling song by heart, it seemed. Her voice floated upward with the sweet summer air, very tuneful, charged with a sort of happy melancholy. One had the feeling that she would have been perfectly content if the June evening had been endless and the supply of clothes inexhaustible, to remain there for 1,000 years, pegging out diapers and singing rubbish. It struck him as a curious fact that he had never heard a member of the party singing alone and spontaneously. It would even have seemed slightly unorthodox, a dangerous eccentricity like talking to oneself. Perhaps it was only when people were somewhere near the starvation level that they had anything to sing about. "You can turn around now," said Julia. He turned around, and for a second almost failed to recognize her. What he had actually expected was to see her naked, but she was not naked. The transformation that had happened was much more surprising than that. She had painted her face. She must have slipped into some shop in the proletarian quarters and bought herself a complete set of makeup materials. Her lips were deeply reddened, her cheeks robed, her nose powdered. There was even a touch of something under the eyes to make them brighter. It was not very skillfully done, but Winston's standards in such matters were not high. He had never before seen or imagined a woman of the party with cosmetics on her face. The improvement in her appearance was startling. With just a few dabs of color in the right places, she had become not only very much prettier, but above all, far more feminine. Her short hair and boyish overalls merely added to the effect. As he took her in his arms, a wave of synthetic violets flooded his nostrils. He remembered the half-darkness of a basement kitchen and a woman's cavernous mouth. It was the very same scent that she had used, but at the moment it did not seem to matter. That sounds very 50s pinup, doesn't it? "Scent too," he said. "Yes, dear, scent too. And do you know what I'm going to do next? I'm going to get a hold of a real woman's frock from somewhere and wear it instead of these bloody trousers. I'll wear silk stockings and high-heeled shoes. In this room, I'm going to be a woman, not a party comrade." They flung their clothes off and climbed into the huge mahogany bed. It was the first time that he had stripped himself naked in her presence. Until now, he had been too much ashamed of his pale and meager body, with the varicose veins standing out in his calves and the discolored patch over his ankle. There were no sheets, but the blanket they lay on was threadbare and smooth, and the size and springiness of the bed astonished both of them. "It's sure to be full of bugs, but who cares?" said Julia. "One never saw a double bed nowadays, except in the homes of the proles." Winston had occasionally slept in one in his boyhood. Julia had never been in one before, so far as she could remember. Presently, they fell asleep for a little while. When Winston woke up, the hands of the clock had crept round to nearly 9. He did not stir, because Julia was sleeping with her head in the crook of his arm. Yeah, as if the other places they have been didn't have bugs. Yeah, I doubt there's a bugless bed in this city. So Julia was sleeping with her head in the crook of his arm. Most of her makeup had transferred itself to his own face or the bolster, but a light stain of roguey still brought out the beauty of her cheekbone. A yellow ray from the sinking sun fell across the foot of the bed and lighted upon the fireplace, where the water in the pan was boiling fast. Down in the yard, the woman had stopped singing, but the faint shouts of children floated in from the street. He wondered vaguely whether in the abolished past it had been a normal experience to lie in a bed like this, in the cool of a summer evening, a man and a woman with no clothes on making love when they chose, talking of what they chose, not feeling any compulsion to get up, simply laying there and listening to peaceful sounds outside. Surely there could never have been a time when that seemed ordinary? Julia woke up, rubbed her eyes, and raised herself on her elbow to look at the oil stove. "Half the water's boiled away," she said. I'll get up and make some coffee in another moment. We've got an hour. What time do they cut the lights off at your flats? 23:30. It's 23 at the hostel, but you have to get in earlier than that because... Hi, get out, you filthy brute. She suddenly twisted herself over in the bed, seized a shoe from the floor and sent it hurtling into the corner with a boyish jerk of her arm, exactly as she had seen her fling the dictionary at Goldstein that morning during the 2 minutes hate. I screwed up that pacing. What was it? He said in surprise. A rat. I saw him strike his beastly nose out of the wainscoting. There's a hole down there. I gave him a good fright anyway. Rats, murmured Winston. In this room? They're all over the place, said Julia indifferently, as she lay down again. We've even got them in the kitchen at the hostel. Some parts of London are swarming with them. Did you know they attack children? Yes, they do. In some of these streets, a woman daren't leave a baby alone for 2 minutes. It's the great huge brown ones that do it, and the nasty thing is that the brutes always... Don't go on, said Winston, with his eyes tightly shut. Dearest, you've gone quite pale. What's the matter? Do they make you feel sick? Of all the horrors in the world, a rat. She pressed herself against him and wound her limbs round him, as though to reassure him with the warmth of her body. He did not reopen his eyes immediately. For several moments he had had the feeling of being back in a nightmare which had recurred from time to time throughout his life. It was always very much the same. He was standing in front of a wall of darkness, and on the other side of it there was something unendurable, something too dreadful to be faced. In the dream, his deepest feeling was always one of self-deception, because he did, in fact, know what was behind the wall of darkness. With a deadly effort, he wrenched a piece out of his own brain, like he could even have dragged the thing into the open. He always woke up without discovering what it was, but somehow it was connected with what Julia had been saying when he cut her short. I'm sorry, he said. It's nothing. I don't like rats, that's all. Don't worry, dear. We're not going to have the filthy brutes in here. I'll stuff the hole with a bit of sacking before we go, and the next time we come, I'll bring some plaster and bung it up properly. Already, the black instant of panic was half forgotten. Feeling slightly ashamed of himself, he sat up against the bedhead. Julia got out of bed, pulled on her overalls, and made the coffee. The smell that rose from the saucepan was so powerful and exciting that they shut the window lest anybody outside should notice and become inquisitive. What was even better than the taste of the coffee was the silky texture given to it by the sugar, a thing Winston had almost forgotten after years of saccharin. With one hand in her pocket and a piece of bread and jam in the other, Julia wandered about the room, glancing indifferently at the bookcase, pointing out the best way of repairing the gate-leg table, plumping herself down in the ragged armchair to see if it was comfortable, and examining the absurd 12-hour clock with a sort of tolerant amusement. She brought the glass paperweight over to the bed to have a look at it in a better light. He took it out of her hand, fascinated as always by the soft, rain-watery appearance of the glass. What is it, do you think? Said Julia. I don't think it's anything. I don't think it was ever put to any use. That's what I like about it. It's a little chunk of history that they've forgotten to alter. It's a message from 100 years ago that if one knew how to read it. And that picture over there? She nodded at the engraving on the opposite wall. Would that be 100 years old? More. 200, I dare say. One can't tell. It's impossible to discover the age of anything nowadays. She went over to look at it. Here's where that brute stuck his nose out, she said, kicking the wainscoting immediately below the picture. What is this place? I've seen it before somewhere. It's a church, or at least it used to be. St. Clement Danes its name was. The fragment of rhyme that Mr. Charrington had taught him came back into his head, and he added, half nostalgically, Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's. To his astonishment, she capped the line, You owe me 3 farthings, say the bells of St. Martin's. When will you pay me, say the bells of Old Bailey. I can't remember how it goes on after that, but anyway, I remember it ends up, Here comes a candle to light you to bed. Here comes a chopper to chop off your head. It was like the 2 halves of a countersign. But there must be another line after the bells of Old Bailey. Perhaps it could be dug out of Mr. Charrington's memory if he were suitably prompted. Who taught you that? He said. My grandfather. He used to say it to me when I was a little girl. He was vaporized when I was 8. At any rate, he disappeared. I wonder what a lemon was, she added inconsequentially. I've seen oranges. They're a kind of round yellow fruit with a thick skin. I can't remember lemons, said Winston. They were quite common in the 50s. They were so sour that it set your teeth on edge even to smell them. I bet that picture's got bugs behind it, said Julia. I'll take it down and give it a good clean someday. I suppose it's almost time we were leaving. I must start washing this paint off. What a bore. I'll get the lipstick off your face afterwards. Winston did not get up for a few minutes more. The room was darkening. He turned over towards the light and lay gazing into the glass paperweight. The inexhaustibly interesting thing was not the fragment of coral, but the interior of the glass itself. There was such a depth of it, and yet it was almost as transparent as air. It was as though the surface of the glass had been the arch of the sky, enclosing a tiny world with its atmosphere complete. He had the feeling that he could get inside it, and that, in fact, he was inside it, along with the mahogany bed and the gate-leg table, and the clock, and the steel engraving, and the paperweight itself. The paperweight was the room he was in, and the coral was Julia's life and his own, fixed in a sort of eternity at the heart of the crystal. $6:32. That was the end of chapter 4. I'm going to take a brief break, get up, walk around a little bit, and we'll come back shortly thereafter. Okay, back to the reading stream. I stood up, I walked around, I stretched out the back, had a few sips, had some Diet Coke, because Diet Coke is basically medicine, right? That's rational logic. Actually, it does have a bunch of weird, strange effects, especially on the sinuses. These last few weeks, couple of months, have been kind of horrible. We've had lots of weather come through, thunderstorms, sunny days, all that kind of. It's that time of year, of course. But the pressure in the air changes dramatically, and my sinuses have been getting more and more sensitive to that. I've had day-long headaches every so often. But along with like Claritin, like a daily Claritin, Diet Coke also seems to help reduce swelling in like the sinuses and the nasal passages, which has been quite helpful. That said, I think we will continue with chapter 5. What are we? We started at chapter 2. So that's 4 chapters. We're doing much better than before. Part 2 goes up to chapter 9. So if we do chapter 5 and maybe chapter 6, or maybe I'll leave chapter 6 and 9 for next time. So that's, yeah, that makes sense. We'll do chapter 5, and we'll probably call it there for tonight. That seems to be reasonable. Okay. Chapter 5. Simi had vanished. A morning came, and he was missing from work. A few thoughtless people commented on his absence. On the next day, nobody mentioned him. On the third day, Winston went into the vestibule of the records department to look at the notice board. One of the notices carried a printed list of the members of the chess committee, of whom Simi had been one. It looked almost exactly as it had looked before. Nothing had been crossed out, but it was one name shorter. It was enough. Simi had ceased to exist. He had never existed. The weather was baking hot. In the labyrinthine ministry of the windowless, air-conditioned rooms kept their normal temperature, but outside the pavements scorched one's feet, and the stench of the tubes at the rush hours was a horror. The preparations for Hate Week were in full swing, and the staffs of all the ministries were working overtime. Processions, meetings, military parades, lectures, waxworks, displays, film shows, telescreen programs, all had to be organized. Stands had to be erected, effigies built, slogans coined, songs written, rumors circulated, photographs faked. Julia's unit in the fiction department had been taken off the production of novels and was rushing out a series of atrocity pamphlets. Winston, in addition to his regular work, spent long periods every day in going through back files of the Times and altering and embellishing news items, which were to be quoted in speeches. Late at night, when crowds of rowdy proles roamed the streets, the town had a curiously febrile air, whatever febrile means. The rocket bombs crashed oftener than ever, and sometimes, in the far distance, there were enormous explosions, which no one could explain, and about which there were wild rumors. How much you want to make a bet the rocket bombs were fired by the party? I'm not sure if the book will ever cover that. I have my suspicions, though. The new tune, which was to be the theme song of Hate Week, the Hate Song it was called, very creative, had already been composed and was being endlessly plugged on the telescreens. It had a savage, barking rhythm which could not exactly be called music, but resembled the beating of a drum. Roared out by hundreds of voices to the tramp of marching feet, it was terrifying. The proles had taken a fancy to it, and in the midnight streets it competed with the still popular It Was Only a Hopeless Fancy. The parson's children played it at all hours of the night and day, unbearably, on a comb and a piece of toilet paper. Winston's evenings were fuller than ever. Squads of volunteers organized by parsons were preparing the street for Hate Week, stitching banners, painting posters, erecting flagstaffs on the roofs, and perilously slinging wires across the street for the reception of streamers. Parsons boasted that Victory Mansions alone would display 400 meters of bunting. He was in his native element as happy as a lark. The heat and the manual work had even given him a pretext for reverting to shorts and an open shirt in the evenings. He was everywhere at once, pushing, pulling, sawing, hammering, improvising, jollying everyone along with camaraderie exhortations. Okay, well, I'm gonna dump that into the buffer. And giving out from every fold of his body what seemed an inexhaustible supply of acrid smelling sweat. Yeah, Parsons, all about the sweat. A new poster had suddenly appeared all over London. It had no caption and represented simply the monstrous figure of a Eurasian soldier 3 or 4 meters high, striding forward with expressionless Mongolian face and enormous boots. A submachine gun pointed from his hip. From whatever angle you looked at the poster, the muzzle of the gun, magnified by the foreshortening, seemed to be pointed straight at you. The thing had been plastered on every blank space, on every wall, even outnumbering the portraits of Big Brother. The proles, normally apathetic about the war, were being lashed into one of their periodical frenzies of patriotism. As though to harmonize with the general mood, the rocket bombs had been killing larger numbers of people than usual. One fell on a crowded film theater in Stepney, burying several hundred victims among the ruins. The whole population of the neighborhood turned out for a long, trailing funeral which went on for hours and was, in effect, an indignation meeting. Another bomb fell on a piece of waste ground, which was used as a playground, and several dozen children were blown to pieces. There were further angry demonstrations. Goldstein was burned in effigy. Hundreds of copies of the poster of the Eurasian soldier were torn down and added to the flames, and a number of shops were looted in the turmoil. Then a rumor flew around that spies were directing the rocket bombs by means of wireless waves, and an old couple who were suspected of being of foreign extraction had their house set on fire and perished of suffocation. In the room over Mr. Charrington's shop, when they could get there, Julia and Winston lay side by side on a stripped bed under the open window. Naked for the sake of coolness, the rat had never come back, but the bugs had multiplied hideously in the heat. It did not seem to matter. Dirty or clean, the room was paradise. As soon as they arrived, they would sprinkle everything with pepper, bought on the black market, tear off their clothes, and make love with sweating bodies. Then fall asleep and wake to find that the bugs had rallied and were massing for the counterattack. Four, 5, 6, 7 times they met during the month of June. Winston had dropped his habit of drinking gin at all hours. He seemed to have lost the need for it. He had grown fatter. His varicose ulcer had subsided, leaving only a brown stain on the skin above his ankle. His fits of coughing in the early morning had stopped. The process of life had ceased to be intolerable. He had no longer any impulse to make faces at the telescreen or shout curses at the top of his voice. Now that they had a secure hiding place, almost a home, it did not even seem a hardship that they could only meet infrequently and for a couple of hours at a time. What mattered was the room over the junk shop should exist. To know that it was there, inviolate, was almost the same as being in it. The room was a world, a pocket of the past where extinct animals could walk. Mr. Charrington, thought Winston, was another extinct animal. He usually stopped to talk with Mr. Charrington for a few minutes on his way upstairs. The old man seemed seldom or never to go out of doors, and on the other hand to have almost no customers. He led a ghost-like existence between the tiny dark shop and an even tinier back kitchen where he prepared his meals, which contained, among other things, an unbelievably ancient gramophone with an enormous horn. He seemed glad of the opportunity to talk. Wandering about among his worthless stock, with his long nose and thick spectacles, and his bowed shoulders in the velvet jacket, he had always vaguely the air of being a collector rather than a tradesman. With a sort of faded enthusiasm, he would finger this scrap of rubbish or that, a china bottle stopper, the painted lid of a broken snuff box, a pinchbeck locket containing a strand of some long-dead baby's hair, never asking that Winston should buy it, merely that he should admire it. To talk to him was like listening to the tinkling of a worn-out musical box. He had dragged out from the corners of his memory some more fragments of forgotten rhymes. There was one about 24 blackbirds, and another about a cow with a crumpled horn, and another about the death of poor Cock Robin. "It just occurred to me you might be interested," he would say with a depreciating little laugh, or a deprecating little laugh whenever he produced a new fragment. But he could never recall more than a few lines of any one rhyme. Both of them knew, in a way, it was never out of their minds, that what was now happening could not last long. There were times when the fact of impending death seemed as palpable as the bed they lay on, and they would cling together with a sort of despairing sensuality, like a damned soul grasping at his last morsel of pleasure when the clock is within 5 minutes of striking. But there were also times when they had the illusion not only of safety, but of permanence. So long as they were actually in this room, they both felt no harm could come to them. Getting there was difficult and dangerous, but the room itself was sanctuary. It was as when Winston had gazed into the heart of the paperweight, with the feeling that it would be possible to get inside that glassy world, and that once inside it, time could be arrested. Often they gave themselves up to daydreams of escape. Their luck would hold indefinitely, and they would carry on their intrigue just like this for the remainder of their natural lives. Or Catherine would die, and by subtle maneuverings, Winston and Julia would succeed in getting married. Or they would commit suicide together. Or they would disappear, alter themselves out of recognition, learn to speak with proletarian accents, get jobs in a factory, and live out their lives undetected in a back street. It was all nonsense, as they both knew. In reality, there was no escape. Even the one plan that was practicable, suicide, they had no intention of carrying out. Practicable. To hang on from day to day and from week to week, spitting out a present that had no future, seemed an unconquerable instinct, just as one's lungs will always draw the next breath so long as there is air available. Sometimes, too, they talked of engaging in active rebellion against the party, but with no notion of how to take the first step. Even if the fabulous brotherhood was a reality, there still remained the difficulty of finding one's way into it. He told her of the strange intimacy that existed, or seemed to exist, between himself and O'Brien, and of the impulse he sometimes felt simply to walk into O'Brien's presence, announce that he was the enemy of the party, and demand his help. Curiously enough, this did not strike her as an impossibly rash thing to do. She was used to judging people by their faces, and it seemed natural to her that Winston should believe O'Brien to be the trustworthy on the strength of a single flash of the eyes. Moreover, she took it for granted that everyone, or nearly everyone, secretly hated the party and would break the rules if he thought it safe to do so. But she refused to believe that widespread, organized opposition existed or could exist. The tales about Goldstein and his underground army, she said, were simply a lot of rubbish which the party had invented for its own purposes and which you had to pretend to believe in. That sounds familiar. Times beyond number, at party rallies and spontaneous demonstrations, she had shouted at the top of her voice for the execution of people whose names she had never heard and in whose supposed crimes she had not the faintest belief. When public trials were happening and she had taken her place in the detachments from the Youth League who surrounded the courts from morning to night, chanting at intervals, "Death to the traitors." During the 2 minutes hate, She always excelled all others in shouting insults at Goldstein. Yet she had only the dimmest idea of who Goldstein was and what doctrines he was supposed to represent. She had grown up since the revolution and was too young to remember the ideological battles of the 50s and 60s. Such a thing was an independent political movement was outside her imagination. So such a thing as an independent political movement was outside her imagination. And in any case, the party was invincible. It would always exist, and it would always be the same. You could only rebel against it by secret disobedience or, at most, by isolated acts of violence such as killing somebody or blowing something up. In some ways, she was far more acute than Winston, and far less susceptible to party propaganda. Once, when he happened in some connection to mention the war against Eurasia, she startled him by saying casually that, in her opinion, the war was not happening. The rocket bombs which fell daily on London were probably fired by the government of Oceania itself, just to keep people frightened. This was an idea that had literally never occurred to him. She also stirred a sort of envy in him by telling him that during the 2 minutes hate, her great difficulty was to avoid bursting out laughing. But she only questioned the teachings of the party when they in some way touched upon her own life. Often she was ready to accept the official mythology simply because the difference between truth and falsehood did not seem important to her. She believed, for instance, having learnt it at school, that the party had invented aeroplanes. In his own school days, Winston remembered in the late 50s, it was only the helicopter that the party claimed to have invented. A dozen years later, when Julia was at school, it was already claiming the aeroplane. One generation more, and it would be claiming the steam engine. And when he told her that airplanes had been in existence before he was born and long before the revolution, the fact struck her as totally uninteresting. After all, what did it matter who had invented airplanes? It was rather more of a shock to him when he discovered that some chance remark that she did not, start that sentence over. It was rather more of a shock to him when he discovered from some chance remark that she did not remember that Oceania, 4 years ago, had been at war with East Asia and at peace with Eurasia. It was true that she regarded the whole war as a sham, but apparently she had not even noticed that the name of the enemy had changed. "I thought we'd always been at war with Eurasia," she said vaguely. It frightened him a little. The invention of airplanes dated from long before her birth, but the switchover in the war had happened only 4 years ago, well after she was grown up. He argued with her about it for perhaps a quarter of an hour. In the end, he succeeded in forcing her memory back until she did dimly recall that at one time East Asia and not Eurasia had been the enemy. But the issue still struck her as unimportant. "Who cares?" she said impatiently. "It's always one bloody war after another, and one knows the news is all lies anyways." Sometimes he talked to her of the records department and the impudent forgeries that he committed there. Such things did not appear to horrify her. She did not feel the abyss opening beneath her feet at the thought of lies becoming truths. He told her the story of Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford, and the momentous slip of paper which he had once held between his fingers. It did not make much impression on her. At first, indeed, she failed to grasp the point of the story. "Were they friends of yours?" she said. "No, I never knew them. They were inner-party members. Besides, they were far older men than I was. They belonged to the old days, before the revolution. I barely knew them by sight." "Then what was there to worry about? People are being killed off all the time, aren't they?" He tried to make her understand. This was an exceptional case. It wasn't just a question of somebody being killed. Do you realize that the past, starting from yesterday, has been actually abolished? If it survives anywhere, it's in a few solid objects with no words attached to them, like that lump of glass there. Already, we know almost literally nothing about the revolution and the years before the revolution. Every record has been destroyed or falsified. Every book has been rewritten. Every picture has been repainted. Every statue and street and building has been renamed. Every date has been altered. And that process is continuing day by day, minute by minute. History has stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right. I know, of course, that the past is falsified, but it would never be possible for me to prove it, even when I did the falsification myself. After this is done, no evidence ever remains. The only evidence is inside my own mind, and I don't know with any certainty that any other human being shares my memories. Just in that one instance in my whole life, I did possess actual, concrete evidence after the event, years after it. And what good was that? It was no good, because I threw it away a few minutes later. But if the same thing happened today, I should keep it. Well, I wouldn't, said Julia. I'm quite ready to take risks, but only for something worthwhile. Not for bits of old newspaper. What could you have done with it even if you had kept it? Not much, perhaps. But it was evidence. It might have planted a few doubts here and there, supposing that I'd dared to show it to anybody. I don't imagine that we can alter anything in our own lifetime. But one can imagine little knots of resistance springing up here and there, small groups of people banding themselves together and gradually growing, and even leaving a few records behind, so that the next generations can carry on where we leave off. I'm not interested in the next generation, dear. I am interested in us. You're only a rebel from the waist downwards, he told her. She thought this brilliantly witty, as so do I, and flung her arms around him in delight. In the ramifications of party doctrine, she had not the faintest interest. Whenever he began to talk of the principles of Ingsoc, okay, clipped. Where were we? Whenever he began to talk of the principles of Ingsoc, doublethink, the immutability of the past, and the denial of objective reality, and to use newspeak words, she became bored and confused and said that she never paid any attention to that kind of thing. One knew that it was all rubbish, so why let oneself be worried by it? She knew when to cheer and when to boo, and that was all one needed. If he persisted in talking of such subjects, she had a disconcerting habit of falling asleep. She was one of those people who can go to sleep at any hour and in any position. Talking to her, he realized how easy it was to present an appearance of orthodoxy while having no grasp whatever of what orthodoxy meant. In a way, the worldview of the party imposed itself most successfully on people incapable of understanding it. They could be made to accept the most flagrant violations of reality because they never fully grasped the enormity of what was demanded of them, and were not sufficiently interested in public events to notice what was happening. By lack of understanding, they remained sane, then simply swallowed everything, and what they swallowed did them no harm, because it left no residue behind. Just as a grain of corn will pass undigested through the body of a bird. Her character, Julia, that's the end of the chapter, by the way, but her character reminds me of, like, the people who didn't vote in the last American election. They're both bad. Why bother? Nothing I do will matter, so I will only act on things that are directly related to me in my daily life. In this case, though, it's a little more extreme. Her apathy at the larger picture is a consequence of not having known any other world. The difference between her and Winston here is quite apparent. Yeah, rebellious but apathetic, or just completely ignorant of what she could have, of what she should have, what she should be able to enjoy, right? And Winston knows something of that. Not enough. Not like the old man who's too old to be able to fight or care. Has one foot in the grave kind of idea. He's nearly out of this world. There's nothing remaining for him to do, so why bother? Her, this is the world. What are you talking? But there's no other world. I wonder is it China that has a single party? Right? I wonder if that's what it feels like to have a single party in power. Like there is no other party. What other party could you possibly be talking about? My entire political world involves all the people in one party. Perhaps then, like, the division, right, is within members of the single party. Right, just like in today's political parties in America and Canada and around the world, there is divisions within the party. Right, not as strong as, opposing political parties in the 2 or 3 party systems around and about the place. But that would be where the fight, where the challenge comes. It's harder because you still have one leader. In this case, Big Brother is the iron fist of the party. And you have this single monumental power structure that you have to look at, and you're one person. Yeah, actually that's hugely different, isn't it? If you're part of an opposition party, you're on a team of comparable strength and size. Whereas when you're faced against a single party, is a monolithic beast, and you have paper cuts that you can issue. Interesting stuff. That was the end of the chapter. We will continue with chapter 7. Chapter 6 next time. At this rate, I think we can get 4 done. So 6, 7, 8, and 9, and we will finish part 2 the next time we read, which I believe will be Monday. Friday and Sunday are gaming nights. So we will probably play Wilds. I want to play Dune Awakening soon. I have friends pestering me to play MechWarrior Online too. So radically different subject matter from today's readings. Yeah, a couple of weeks left of this book, and then we have to find another book to give that some thought. Make Valana give that some thought, because she essentially picks these books. I am particularly ignorant in the way of literature from a North American point of view. I did my high schooling and young adulting in Australia, so we were given very different books, and I was very disinterested in reading. That's one of the reasons I'm reading today. Today's end of this age. So here we are. Here we go. Thank you to everyone who has kindly watched till the end. If you missed the previous chapters, they are archived as VODs and for longer term over on my YouTube channel. Please feel free to subscribe there and follow here if you haven't. Please kindly return your materials before departing, and be kind to one another.